This episode of The Shift is sponsored by LinkedIn. As a B2B marketer, you know how noisy the ad space can be. Well, it's time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you. That's LinkedIn Ads, the platform where you can cut through the noise by precisely reaching the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. Target your ideal audience by job title, industry, company, and more. Stand out with LinkedIn Ads and start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. LinkedIn Ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. You'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers, 1 billion members, 180 million senior level executives, and 10 million C-level executives. You'll be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools that are built specifically for B2B. In technology, LinkedIn generated 2 to 5 times higher return on ad spend than other social media platforms. And you'll work with a partner who respects the B2B world that you operate in. 79% of B2B content marketers said LinkedIn produces the best results for paid media. Throughout my career on magazines, digital media, and now podcasts, LinkedIn has been invaluable. It's given me direct access to people and ideas that have helped shape the Shift podcast and newsletter and seen it grow into the thriving hub for midlife women that it is today. Stand out with LinkedIn Ads and start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/theshift to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/theshift. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be. Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40, created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is the creator of the global bestseller and smash hit TV adaptation, The Discovery of Witches, Deborah Harkness. Now, I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit obsessed with all things witchy. I've been a devotee ever since the proof of the very first book landed on my desk, and I tumbled headlong into the world of Diana Bishop. But before all this, Deborah was a scholar, a historian who teaches the history of science at the University of Southern California. She is an authority on alchemical manuscripts, and for her doctorate researched the history of magic and science in Europe between 1500 and 1700. Now, if you've read the books, that might sound a bit familiar. There's more. Just a couple of years ago, Deborah discovered she was actually descended from not one, but 2 of the Salem women.
I think that's why older women were sometimes scary and accused of being witches in the past. That accumulative life experience and wisdom and having to develop all of those sort of empathetic and listening and learning skills. And that's why we're scary.
Deborah joined me to talk about the latest book in the All Souls series, The Blackbird Oracle, which takes us to Salem and the descendants of the witch trials. We discussed her life-changing cancer diagnosis, why women's pain is endlessly ignored, why she won't be blunting her sharp, pointy edges for anyone, and why she loves being the crone of dark academia. Are both your parents British? Because I thought I read that your dad was Scottish.
He's of Scottish descent, but Mum was actually born in Liverpool. But weirdly, I've done all those DNA tests, and my dad is actually more English than my mum.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those DNA tests, they're kind of, on the one hand, I get it. They're totally fascinating. But on the other hand, I don't know whether, have you heard of Dani Shapiro?
Yes.
Yeah, so she came on the podcast and she was talking about, she did that DNA test, discovered her dad wasn't her dad. I mean, it's like, whoa.
I know. I mean, it's hard, and I don't think that people really appreciate what might get churned up.
Yeah, it's just a fun thing.
It's just a fun thing to do, and nobody really pays much attention to, oh yeah, it'll be fine, it'll be great, it'll be whatever. And, you can get some very interesting things. I mean, somewhere in me, I have got 0.02 sub-Saharan Africa,
Okay.
which I was not surprised by. And yet at the same time, I cannot find where that sub-Saharan Africa came in. It was many, 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 many generations ago. And I just am fascinated by that. And where was that point of contact? So it's been amazing to do it. But yes, my mother turns out to have lots of Isle of Man, lots of Ireland, lots of Scotland, and lots of England, where my dad is English with a bit of Scots. And that is pretty much and Dutch. That's the whole story.
Oh, it is absolutely fascinating. I mean, I obviously want to ask you a bit more about that, but it doesn't feel like the right place to start, really.
I love your podcast so much. I love all of these podcasts that are so affirming about women in aging, or women in wising, as I like to say.
I love that, wising. Wising is much better than aging, isn't it? Did you come up with that yourself, or did you nick it from someone?
I actually came up with that myself.
Can I borrow it?
Yeah, that's what happens. I think that's why older women were sometimes scary and accused of being witches in the past. That accumulative life experience and wisdom, and the way that women, sort of assimilated by taking care of others and having to develop all of those sort of empathetic and listening and learning skills, even if they got no credit for it, no payment for it, or whatever. Women carry the dignity of that wisdom with them. And that's why we're scary.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, isn't it? I was obviously been thinking a lot about witches. But just the way that language around aging, wising, is used, but the way it's used against older women is like a stick to beat us with. It's like, the kind of stereotypical witch and the crone and the, all of that. I mean, have you there are two kind of areas for you really. When in your own wising, I love that. Have you felt like that negative energy, or has it felt positive?
I think it's felt positive, but that doesn't mean it's not frightening at times. I think accepting your power and wearing it and having absolutely no time for hiding it, or, I don't know about you, but I just feel like I like my sharp, pointy edges, and I don't want to shave them off to make other people comfortable anymore.
Yeah. One of the things I always struggled with in a work environment was I was never very good at, well, that analogy you just made is a good way to put it. I was never very good at shaving them off. My face is just too expressive. So even when, I thought that I was behaving well, half the time my face was saying, oh, you're a fucking idiot.
I face crimes. Yes. For me, it's impatience. That's what always gives me away, is that I find it very difficult when people are very slow to learn and change behaviors. My wife was always saying the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I can get very impatient with people who keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And my face, my voice, everything just gives me away that I've had it now. I've done this now with you 5 or 6 times, and I'm not going to do it again.
Is that with students or just in life? Or
I have the most patience with students. It's my colleagues who are more on an even playing field. The ones who I would expect to rely upon in a work situation, and then find I can't for whatever reason. That's when I get impatience. Somebody called it the other day, weaponized incompetence.
Yes, I read something similar about that. Basically, convenient incompetence, and I think it's anybody with, I'm sorry, little brother who, sorry, mum, anybody with a little brother who, only got asked to wash up once because it only took how many plates can you afford to lose? It's kind of that, isn't it? But then it's much more serious when we see it in governments, in corporations, and, it's like the convenient way of not having to step up.
I think that's why so many of us are so tired. It's because we're doing it, our own work, and then we're doing work for everyone who's weaponized or conveniently found incompetence to be a way out of things. I think sometimes it's seen as very gendered. Women pick up all the pieces and it's men actually who, are the ones who are incompetent. But I think it's not gendered. I think it can go all the ways there are. It just depends on the personality of the people around you. There's always going to be one highly competent person that everyone else can rely on.
Yeah, and I often wonder whether, in a way, that highly competent person might sometimes do it to themselves.
I have.
Yeah, hands up, yeah. Because you're a bit like, I'll just do it because I'll do it quicker and better, and you're nodding along.
Yeah, I get it. I think it's that root of impatience in my personality. By the time I've explained it and tweaked it and re-explained it and waited, I just think I should have done it myself. And that's terrible because it's not letting anyone else grow or change. And again, I don't do this with my students, but I can do this when I'm out in the world with friends and with family and colleagues.
Before we get into family and witches and whatnot, tell us a little bit about you. So before Discovery of Witches, before you even became an academic, what was little Deb like?
I'm told that my first words were, "What's that?" I was one of those fantastically and annoyingly curious children who couldn't stop asking questions about the world. And I never even really listened to the answer. I was just identifying all the things that made me curious, made me wonder. And I was famous. My mother actually took me to the pediatrician when I was under the age of 1 because she thought something was very wrong with me because I would stand in my cot and scream at the top of my lungs and throw things. And the doctor had to explain to her there was nothing wrong with me. It was just that I wanted to do things that my body and my locomotion skills and everything wasn't capable of doing. And so I was frustrated and impatient. So yeah, curiosity, frustration, impatience were all very driving forces. And the one thing that slowed me down and grounded me was books. I was a very early reader and a rapidly progressing reader. So I was occasionally a problematic student in the lower grade levels because I was constantly wanting to read at a higher level than my classmates. So we had something called sustained silent reading. There were these boxes of cards, and you could work your way through these boxes that were all different colors. And I remember I was in second grade when I reached the end of the line of sustained silent reading boxes, and they were supposed to keep you going till fifth grade. So I was several years ahead of schedule. And after that, people just used to send me to the library. If Deb's at the library, she's a very happy person, and she's not impatient. She loses all sense of time. Her questions are being answered by a book, not a human being who's having to do other things. So yeah, books were just such an important part of my life, and libraries as well. Like a library was just, for me, it was like going to church. It was sacred space where I could be myself and be sort of uncensored and feel comfortable.
When you became an academic, was that something you'd always wanted to do? Did that come out of your passion for books? Did you just start researching and never leave? I mean,
I started researching and never left. Neither of my parents went to college or university. And so for me, going to college was like going to another planet. It wasn't because my parents weren't clever, and it wasn't because they weren't curious about the world. They were both incredible readers, incredible travelers. They just never had a formal education. Everything that they learned through books, through experiences. And when I went to college, I don't think I even really understood that you could do that for a living. You could be an academic for a living. And when I discovered it, I thought, well, that's interesting. But honestly, I really only went to graduate school to become a college president because I loved administration. And somebody said to me, you absolutely have to get a degree, a higher degree, if you want to do this. I fell in love with the research. Once I started doing research, all thoughts of being a college or university, dean or president evaporated. I just wanted to go to the library, my safe space, and never leave.
You just said you loved administration. I don't think anybody's ever said that to me before.
I think it's where that sharp, curious, easily frustrated person likes to wade in and fix things. It ties in neatly with my highly competent problem. And it was enormously satisfying for me. People would have problems, and I could look at the problem and think, well, we could do this, this, or this. One of these is going to work. And it made me feel like I was accomplishing something, like I was doing good in the world and that I was making a difference. And what I discovered was that making a difference is still important to me now as a writer. It was when I was an educator, and that's what really matters to me, not how I go about doing it. And in fact, my incredible impatience is a major reason I could never be an administrator, because I tell the truth way too often.
Yeah, that problematic, face crime and that diplomacy.
And just telling people that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That is never going to work. What makes you think that will work or fix this or make it better in any way? And even if I govern my tongue, which I don't always do perfectly, the face, like you, Sam, the face gives it away.
This is going to sound like a really strange segue, but it feels like the right thing to do. Do you think, now you were diagnosed, weren't you, with ovarian cancer 3 years ago? 4?
2021.
3 years. Do you think that impatience that we've been talking about ever since we started talking, did that come into play with the diagnosis? Because your journey to diagnosis is actually quite interesting, isn't it?
I was very concerned about my own health in the autumn of 2021 when I looked for help for what seemed to be a sort of sudden onset or a rapid increase, a sort of strange gastrointestinal problems. It was amazing to me that I felt there was this urgency, and I could not convince anyone else that it was urgent.
By anyone else, you mean the doctor? Do you mean?
I mean doctors, I mean family, with all the best intentions in the world. I'd say, I'm really, really worried. This doesn't seem right. People would say, oh, you're under a lot of stress. You haven't been getting enough sleep lately. And I was convinced there was something very, very wrong. My patience wore out is essentially what happened. And I began to get very, very bossy with everybody about what was going on with my body and how it was completely not okay. And that I was not willing. At one point, someone diagnosed me with sort of IBS kinds of things. Kind of IBS syndrome, which I've since learned it's very, very rare for anyone to be diagnosed with IBS for the first time in their late 50s. The advice was to modify my diet pretty seriously and my stress levels, and to wait for 6 months to a year. I found actually my writing journal. I was with writer friends at the Tate Britain working in the cafe, and I was using a notebook I had used that autumn, and I turned the pages, and it was all this kind of heartbreaking to read litany of my symptoms and how I was working through my symptoms and what doctors were saying and what I was trying and that nothing was working. One of the doctors, and I'd forgotten this, said, whatever's wrong with you, it's uncomfortable, but it's not deadly.
Oh, the rage, because it was.
It's one of the most deadly cancers you can have because it is often not diagnosed until very, very late. And my impatience and my what's that, and my easy frustration, low frustration threshold combined to make me absolutely determined that I was not going to take, you're going to be uncomfortable for years, perhaps forever. And, but it's not deadly. That's not how my body was feeling. My body felt like I was in a 5-alarm fire. I needed help. And that was when I found my oncologist, which was a long process. I looked at her and I said, I am not ready to die and I need your help because I want to survive and I need your help to do it. That was the beginning of our relationship. I was forthright about what my desires were. And I said, I will do whatever it takes to survive because I still have work I want to do. I still have a life I want to live. At the time, I had just turned 56. And so it's hard. It's hard.
You hear again and again so many women talking about the way that their instinct, their pain is ignored, dismissed, or just, like you just described, oh, you've got nausea, diarrhea, constipation, that's IBS. It's all kind of normalish. Like you say, uncomfortable, but not deadly. So did you go to find did you already know that you had ovarian cancer when you found the oncologist, or did you find an oncologist and say, these are my symptoms?
They do not know really that you have ovarian cancer until they cut you open. There aren't any tests. A lot of people think, a pap smear or another kind of gynecological examination or an ultrasound or a transvaginal ultrasound will pick it up. That will pick up a mass. And there are blood tests that can pick up an elevated factor called CA-125 in your bloodstream. My CA-125 was not highly elevated. They found a mass with a transvaginal ultrasound after I started kicking and screaming that I did not want an EKG. I did not want to do a stress test. I wanted someone to look down into my body and tell me why my body was having these problems. They picked up at the time, it was early December, an 11 centimeter mass on my ovary. By the time I went into surgery, which was about 2 weeks later, it was 15 centimeters. And no one had felt it because it had burst. The mass had burst. So it was like a deflated balloon, and it had wrapped itself around my appendix, killed the appendix. This is why I was in so much pain, because nobody could really feel anything. We all went into that surgery. My oncologist, my fantastic surgeon, Lorna Rodriguez at City of Hope, we all went into the surgery thinking they were going to go in, they were going to take out the mass, and everything was going to be done. I went in first thing in the morning, and I was not out until almost 5 p.m. because the appendix had to go. Cancer had seeded on the outside of the colon, fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, both ovaries. Everything went. When I woke up, I looked at my wife and I said, did they find anything? And she said, yes, it's cancer.
Wow. And they didn't leave much behind.
Oh, no. There's a lot of room in there now. It affected my balance. I did a lot of yoga and to try and realign my balance after the hysterectomy and before I had a double mastectomy, which also affected my balance. it was serious, and it took me about 6 weeks to recover from the surgery sufficiently that they could start chemotherapy. And then I did 6 cycles of pretty toxic chemotherapy, lost every bit of hair on my body. And I do mean every bit. I had wonderful porcelain doll baby skin and was bald as an egg. And I was absolutely terrified because the recurrence rate for ovarian cancer is so very, very high. They found a genetic condition that had led to the cancer that put me at risk for breast cancer and for melanoma. Really, my entire life was dramatically altered in December of 2021. It's taken on a new form on the other side of it, but I sometimes look like I'm reading that writing journal in which I'd recorded not only what I was working on, but all of these other feelings as well. It was like I was reading about someone else. I almost didn't recognize that person anymore. I've been through wising.
Wow, that's in an epic way. You mentioned a double mastectomy. Was that preventative?
Yeah. I have the BRCA2 genetic mutation, which very much linked to the Ashkenazi community. It was there that they first discovered BRCA2. Just for all the listeners out there, I have the Western Scottish Highlands BRCA mutation. Anyone whose ancestors lived in an isolated, relatively remote community, like the Western Highlands, and there was a fair amount of intermarriage, is possibly, a candidate. It's not just Ashkenazi Jews. It is, in fact, about population isolation. So people who come from islands can have a rather high incidence of it. And one of the studies right now is working with a community in the Orkneys who have a high incidence of ovarian cancer. So yeah, I do find it very, very strange that I wrote a series of novels about a vampire geneticist who had a genetically carried disease years before I discovered I had a genetically triggered disease.
And I just want to thank you so much for making that link, because I was just thinking, how the hell am I going to get from this conversation to talking about witches? How am I going to do that? We've just done it for me. I love you. Thank you. So you didn't, when you started writing Discovery of Witches, you didn't obviously know that you carried that gene. You also didn't know that you were descended from Salem women.
Mm-mm. In fact, I gave numerous detailed and lengthy interviews in which I explained I had no connection to Salem. And I knew that because I had done my family tree. I teach classes on family history and genealogy as a research method. And, I felt I'd been up every branch as far as I could go, but they keep putting more and more records online, little local, record offices, parish registers. And with every new thing that comes online, you can make a fresh connection. And it was just before COVID, I think. Must have been around 2018, 19, that I started going up a line and thinking, oh, this is headed in a very particular easterly direction in Massachusetts. And was then able to find not one, but two of the accused Salem witches in my family tree, and one of them had been executed.
Tell me a little bit more about those women.
Well, one of them name is marvelous. It's Mehitable Braybrook.
It's fantastic. If you've made that up, it's like, yeah, it's wonderful.
I know. It's so great. And Mehitable Braybrook was a woman who was the illegitimate child of a master and indentured servant. And when the master had gotten an indentured servant pregnant, the courts required that he take in his child and raise it with his wife. I think a lot about Mehitable Braybrook and what it must have been like to be the illegitimate daughter of a servant and the master raised by the master's wife. in colonial Massachusetts, where survival was pretty fragile, where there had been a series of very bloody and devastating wars with the indigenous population. She grew up being bossy, opinionated, outspoken, rebellious, a lot of things that I can empathize with. That was really all it took to get people to point fingers at you in Salem in 1692. You just needed to stand out in some way, because standing out made people uncomfortable. When they were uncomfortable, it was very easy to go from that to accusing the person making you uncomfortable of actually causing all of the horrible things that had happened to you for a very long time, and to your livestock, and to your house, and to your friends, and to your neighbors. And it just snowballed and snowballed within a community. And so that was Mahitable Braybook's story. She was still in jail, or still under, technically under arrest, when the trials wound down. After the peak of the panic, I think people began to really question, why are we putting 3, 5, 7, and 9-year-old children in jail for witchcraft? And the sheer volume of it, it was almost as though it was easier to find someone who wasn't somehow implicated in an accusation than who was. And people, I think it was just starting to strain the limits of credulity. And someone said, let's take a pause. She actually was able to, she survived. She got out of jail in the end and survived her accusation. My other ancestor was not as lucky.
And who was she?
Elizabeth Jackson Howe.
Yeah, and I've heard of her, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the better known witches who, again, just someone who stood out, who managed a farm, whose husband was not always able to fully work. So she would have been a bit masculine in that community, I think, therefore made people uncomfortable. One of my favorite, I'm not related to them, but one of my favorite sort of hidden stories of Salem is that one of the women accused of witchcraft, Martha Carrier, was married to a man who was over 7 feet tall.
Wow, that's tall.
And I think that's what got her.
Just because she was married to
somebody who looked so unbelievably, in a time when an average male height would have, gone from somewhere around 5'5", 5'6" to 5'10", 7+ feet. He could walk
giant, isn't it?
He's giant. He could walk 16 miles a day.
Wow. So you're related to those women down your father's line, aren't you? Was he still alive when you found this out?
No, he died of cancer in 2015.
Oh, I'm sorry. So have you been able to talk to anybody in your family about it to find out?
No, I mean, we are a dwindling line, the Harknesses. My father was one of 2 children. His brother died before him. My grandparents are both long dead. My mom survives happily. And it's just me and my brother, and I don't have children. So it's a very interesting thing when we were trying to figure out which side the BRCA mutation came from. It was, in fact, the diminishing size of the Harkness family, especially the diminishing number of women who, which kind of tipped us off that it was coming from the paternal line, which is not what we normally think of, right? Do you have a history of ovarian cancer? And you're probably, no, there are no girls. Do you have a history of breast cancer? No, there are no girls. So it's amazing how, again, I've been writing these books about genetics and genealogy and legacy, and where it put me post-pandemic was this incredible medical and personal moment where I was dealing with family and legacy and genetics.
So did that discovery lead to the new book?
What do you think?
I think yes.
Yeah, I think so too. I'd known I wanted to tell the story of the Proctor family for a very long time. I was working on it on and off, maybe for 5 or 6 years since before pandemic. And I just couldn't get the story right. I knew the story I wanted to tell, and I could not get it on the page. And after I went through my chemotherapy and had about 2 months free of heavy metals going through my body, I said, I know how to write this, and started the process of getting the Blackbird Oracle on the page.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved it. And I loved the out and out witchiness of it. But I loved that we were back with Diana's family and Diana's lineage, and deep in Salem.
And deep into a real time of transition as a mother, as a wife, as a woman. And I think I needed to go through those kinds of transitions. I wish the universe could have found a gentler, less lethal way to take me through them. But nonetheless, I think both the pandemic, in terms of understanding some of the dynamics around Salem, and then my own cancer diagnosis, and really having to sort of face my father's legacy. You know, everybody always says, oh, you look so much like your mom, and you love England, and you spend so much time in England. And then really looking at my father's family really carefully, because I could do that online. It was very difficult to go through cancer in the winter of 2022, when we were going through second wave COVID, and where, you know, all the books tell you, make dates with your friends, go out to lunch, have a massage. Well, none of these things were available to an immunocompromised cancer patient. But I could spend a lot of time online reading wills from the 17th century and getting to know my father's family up close and personal. I was hanging out with ghosts and really having those moments like the ones that you see on television. Who do you think you are? Or, you know, any of these programs where somebody realizes, oh my gosh, you know, I remember Judi Dench having this connection to Denmark, you know, and wondering about her, thinking about her life and the strange ways that had come down to her. And I had the same experience. And I've often wondered if the television show was sort of scripted to say that. But I had a very similar experience of thinking, wow, everything was almost inevitable in a weird way. I could trace through all these branches a sense of how I ended up at this moment. And that's what let me tell the story of Diana in her 40s, in a moment of shift in the power dynamic in her relationship with Matthew, in an important transition for her children. I'm just obsessed with transitions these days and change.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the fact that, you know, there you were in 2008, and you were an academic, you were authority on alchemical manuscripts and teaching history of science. And from the outside, seemingly out of nowhere, a person who's meant to be delivering an academic book delivers a book about witches, demons and vampires. And without knowing that you're descended from Salem women, without knowing any of it, it does, even if you're not a person even if you're very sciencey and you don't believe anything that can't be explained by science, it does make you think that feels like it was kind of meant to be.
It really does. And yet I really do consider myself to be so fortunate that this all happened to me after I turned 40. A lot of people have a troubling and destructive midlife crisis. I wrote a vampire novel. It's really opened up my life in ways I could never have imagined, and given me a chance to talk to audiences about things that really matter to me: women and power and empathy, and the importance of remembering the past so that we hopefully don't make the same mistakes over and over again. All of those things that were sort of so important to me on a micro level became possible for me to speak to them on a macro level. And oddly, the way I feel about my cancer experience as well. It's a privilege to be able to speak to it, to have the platform to speak about it, to hopefully if I can save one life of one woman who says, my God, those symptoms sound like my symptoms, then it's all worth it. I never once, Sam, thought, why me? I thought, why not me? I've got a lot of privileges going into this situation, and far better it be me than someone who doesn't have that level of privilege. And I just became really determined that I was going to do everything I could to talk about my experience and to heighten awareness so that other women hopefully won't maybe get the same kind of diagnosis and as I do, but might be able to find it earlier. And that's become a big part of where I am right now. Health-wise, I have what is called NED, no evidence of disease. I have been no evidence of disease since June of 22. So I'm about to hit my 2-year anniversary. 18 months is really important. A lot of ovarian cancer recurs within 18 months. It didn't for me. And so now I'm shooting for my 2-year mark. Then in December, it'll be 2.5 years. And this time next year, it'll be 3. And as we keep racking up those years and the medicine continues to improve as dramatically as it is at this moment, I start to breathe. I actually made plans for a holiday for next spring, which is the first time I've done anything like that since December of 2021.
I think I read somewhere that you said that it transformed you from a rapid-fire multitasker to a one-thing-at-a-time girl.
Yes. And if people try to ask me a question while I'm cooking, make sure there are batteries in the fire alarms, because I just can't mentally juggle. And that's scary. And I think that happens to a lot of women, and a lot of women don't talk about it, whether it's happening in the menopause, whether it's happening a little later in life. Again, for those of us who have been, have the curse of competence, we're used to juggling and doing things on the fly. And suddenly you can't do that anymore. And you feel like such a fail, like you're letting everyone down. I would say to my editor, I'm sorry, I can't predict when I'm going to get this draft into you, because my life just doesn't work that way anymore. I can't plan. And she was wonderful. And so were my agents in like helping to manage this. I was hardest on myself because I wanted it to feel like what I was used to, not have this new monkey wrench thrown my way.
Yeah, after a lifetime of, like you said, being competent, being in control, being the person who did the thing, kind of to have that taken away almost.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to Diana as a character, because she seems to have everything together and going for her. And yet on the inside, can be kind of a mess. And both her denial of that and then her acceptance, coming to terms with it, I don't think that's a story I'm ever going to get tired of telling. And I think it's such a universal story as we learn and develop as a human being and become comfortable in our skin. And I think that's why I keep going back to her, because I still keep thinking she has things to share and to tell that, who knows, will resonate with the reader. And they'll think, yeah, I know how she feels, and maybe I can say something about it.
I was thinking, I remember thinking this a lot when I read Twilight, and obviously Discovery of Witches is very different, but the whole vampire thing and this kind of controlling character that is the vampire, the kind of borderline coercive, if you like. When you're writing, Matthew, how do you kind of square that? Where is your head at? Because you've got this brilliant, powerful woman coming into more and more power. And he is, on the one hand, helping, learning to help her on that journey. But on the other hand, you've got this very controlling figure traditionally in vampire culture, but also Matthew,
also 1500 plus years old.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he wasn't born in 1970, was he?
No. And that's what helps me is that this is a man who has benefited from millennia of patriarchy. Patriarchy is hardwired into Matthew de Clermont. It's not reflective. He does not question it. He does, she forces the issue on him, and just as his mother did. And so there's this way that I leverage a lot of family example to get Matthew around to a point where he can authentically, give when it comes to Diana and her desires. He never will lose that. He's not capable of it. I mean, we see older patriarchs having a problem with it in 2024.
Yeah, and they're like 70, 80 years old. Yeah.
So Matthew is what? Almost 200 times that? I normally wait until I really dislike him at least a bit. And that's where I stop with Matthew, because I don't want to make him unlikable. I want to make his redemption as possible as Diana's redemption. I want them to learn and grow together, which is the ideal relationship. But, oh man, people who want him to be evolved and have experienced first wave feminism and second wave feminism, he missed those days. That's just not realistic for a vampire who's been kicking around since, 500 AD.
Do you get pressure because you've got obviously a massive fan community. I mean, you were writing dark academia long before Book Talk decided dark academia was a thing. Do they have problems with Matthew? Do they feel like he should get woke?
Oh, yeah. But what's interesting is they have more of a problem with Diana for not putting her hands on her hips and getting stroppy with him.
Oh, yeah. Let's blame the woman. Yeah.
The fans blame and actually actively people who turn away from the books do it because they hate Diana, which is blaming her for Matthew and making her responsible for changing him when he's the only person who can change him. And it is a real eye-opener for an educator who can talk about this till you're blue in the face, but then when a reader or a student does it, you can, there's this moment of saying, now you realize what you've just done. You just blamed Diana for Matthew's deficiencies as a human being and character. So yeah, they do get frustrated. And also I love being what someone on TikTok, I think, called me the grandmother of dark academia.
The grand dam of dark academia. Yeah.
The crone of dark academia. Yeah. I'm feeling very into that these days.
Yeah. I think we could have I'd be keen to go really deep on the whole Matthew Diana thing, because I do. I'm a sad fangirl, but I do think I'm kind of not surprised that they blame Diana, because I kind of feel like I've seen loads of conversations on the place that used to be Twitter about, when there's when women are arguing with each other about whether or not they should have cleaners, why don't they just go and tell their husband to do some housework? Or
I don't have a lot of patience for people of any gender who put their hands on their hips and just start shouting. I don't consider that to be a path forward. I think we see ample evidence every minute of every day about what happens when human beings lose the power of empathy and lose the ability to have civil discourse about their differences.
I'm going to stop myself asking you a million questions about Matthew and Diana, because that's not what we're here for.
We'll have to do podcast part 2 for that.
Oh, God. Honestly, I could just get on Zoom and ask you a million questions. But as a fan, I am so glad that you've gone back to Diana, because much as I'm interested in Marcus and Phoebe, I'm just not that interested. I'm interested to a point, but really I care about Diana the most.
You are not alone.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was very happy when Caitlin emailed me and said, do you want to read a PDF of Black Book Oracle? I'm sorry, does the Pope wear a big hat? Send it to me now.
You've all been very patient while we got through global pandemic and cancer. together. And I'm very grateful that so many people were still wanting to check in with Diana after all these years. So thank you for your loyalty.
I'm a sad fan. Right. The questions that I always ask at the end. What is your emotional age?
I think I'm still that 5-year-old child saying, what's that? What's that? Yeah. Who still wants to have a temper tantrum and a meltdown and does her very best to avoid it, I think.
I think you have all the reasons to have a temper tantrum, to be honest. Give us a book recommendation.
I will say that if you have not read The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, speaking about women and witches and history, it is a real treat. She's best known as a young adult author. This is a very adult book. It's historical fiction with a little lick of magical realism in it. And I thought it was a tour de force. I really thought it was amazing and had so much to say about being a woman and being powerful.
What advice would you give younger women?
Listen to your gut. Your gut feelings are your guardian angels. Listen to them. If something tells you this is not safe, this is not where I'm supposed to be, don't question it. Act on it and get yourself into a place of greater safety. I have never known a gut feeling to be wrong.
How old do you think you were when you learned that?
I was 16 and I dropped out of secondary school and went to college, and people told me I was ruining my life because I wasn't going to have a high school degree. I went off to college and it did not ruin my life. I just knew that I needed fresh challenges and a new environment. And so I went to college a bit early, but it was against everybody's wisdom. The only thing telling me to do it was my own instincts.
Who is your old bird role model?
I have to say it's Maggie Smith. I want to be at a point where I can just be as blunt as she is, both on and off the screen. I love her characters, her character in Gosford Park, her character in Downton Abbey, any of these sort of acerbic, sharp, clever women. I adore the way that she just calls a spade a spade. And so she's my role model. And I recently watched Tea with the Dames. And
oh, yes, I've seen that. That's with her, Judi Dench. Oh.
Eileen Atkinson and Joan Plowright. And
that's
honestly, poor Eileen Atkinson makes the mistake of saying that she never accepted the role of Cleopatra because she just didn't feel she was beautiful enough. And Maggie Smith said, "Oh, Eileen, what are we supposed to say to that? No, Eileen, you are beautiful enough to play Cleopatra." And I just thought, oh my goodness, that might have been running through my head, but I would never have said it out loud, never mind on camera. And so she became my role model after seeing Tea with the Dames.
I mean, who knows what might be coming out of your mouth when you're that old?
I know. Or out of my pen and my fingertips.
Yes. Can't wait.
I know, me neither.
What's your superpower?
Empathy. I really got to develop it as a historian, and I think the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes without judgment is a superpower because you are much more sensitive out in the world where there are fragile beings and everyone has a story. So I would say empathy.
And last one, how many fucks do you give?
Well, I think I'm in some kind of a rehabilitation or a 12-step program. I think earlier in my life, I gave all the fucks. And then I think I wanted very much to give 0. I think once I got cancer, I got to about maybe I give 3 to 4 fucks, but I still want to reach 0. I think Maggie Smith may be at 0.5 or 1 or 0, and that's what I'm headed for. I'm hoping to grow into that ability because I think the ability not to apologize or explain or diminish your own wants and needs, that has got to be an amazing feeling. And one day I want to feel it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.